Welcome. I'm Debbie Kirkman with the Flight Safety Foundation. Our panel today is focusing on humanitarian uses of unmanned aircraft systems, or UAS. UAS have been around for decades in military and recreational activities, but for humanitarian and commercial, they're just beginning to find their way. We believe at Flight Safety Foundation that understanding the safety considerations for these growing UAS operations is important not only from an airspace integration view, but also because we believe UAS and autonomous operations will be a growing part of our overall aviation environment. Today, we have a chance to share with you some of the safety aspects associated with providing humanitarian services via air operations. We've invited representatives of several international organizations to share their perspectives on the use of UAS and other air ops for small and medium payloads. Our panel moderator today is Dr. Sarah De La Rosa, the Associate for UAS Strategy and Policy at Outside International, based in Zurich, Switzerland. Sarah has been working in the UAS industry for nearly a decade, and before joining Outside International, she's worked on humanitarian applications of UAS with Unicef, the Global Fund, and the World Bank. Sarah, welcome, and thank you for moderating this panel.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It really is an honor to be a part of this panel and to be moderating with such an exclusive lineup of speakers. I'm going to introduce everyone. We have with us from the International Committee of the Red Cross, Mr. Alexis Clare. He has been at the Air Operations Unit since 2014. He's currently Project Manager of Innovation in Humanitarian Aviation and in charge of implementing the integration of unmanned aircraft into the operations of ICRC. He is calling in today from Kenya, from the field. So thank you so much for making your availability to us today. From Médecins Sans Frontières, we have...
Sarah, could we ask you to show your webcam, please?
Oh, I thought that was, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, sorry. So should we restart this or?
No, you're good, you're good.
I think we should restart, sorry, Mark.
Okay, we'll restart.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're today we're really not trying to, you know, if there's a mistake, that's the reason we want to, you know, just verbally say it. And we tried to send some messages to you via a webcam request, but you weren't responding. So then I just stepped in and said, would you show your camera?
Yeah, sorry.
Let's start over. Let's start over.
Yeah.
But we really don't want to do that. We want to kind of keep going. And even if there is a mistake, we just gently and kindly catch it and correct it. Okay?
Yeah,
so
understood.
Let's start over.
I saw my camera pop up and I thought you had activated me. So sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to Debbie then. Okay.
Yeah, and don't forget to put the speaker slide up once she starts introducing speakers.
Should I just start or am I waiting for something?
Excuse me, Debbie. I said go, but I put myself on mute first. All right. Good smile. All right. Ready? Go.
Welcome. I'm Debbie Kirkman with the Flight Safety Foundation. We're here today to discuss some of the unique aspects of humanitarian UAS operations. Flight Safety Foundation believes that understanding the safety foundation considerations for these new growing operations is important, not only from an airspace integration view, but also because we believe UAS and autonomous operations will be a growing part of our overall aviation environment. Today, we have the chance to share with you some of the safety aspects associated with providing humanitarian services via air operations. We've invited several representatives of international humanitarian organizations to share their perspectives on some of the innovations they are employing, especially those involving UAS for small and medium payloads as a way of delivering critical services and goods. Our panel moderator is Dr. Sarah De La Rosa, Associate for UAS Strategy and Policy at Outside International, based in Zurich, Switzerland. Sarah has been working in the UAS industry for nearly a decade, and she's worked on humanitarian applications of UAS with Unicef, the Global Fund, and the World Bank. Sarah, welcome, and thank you for moderating this panel.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's really an honor to be a part of this panel for the Flight Safety Foundation and to have such a lineup of exclusive speakers today. I'm going to introduce each one of you. From the International Committee of the Red Cross, we have Mr. Alexis Clare. He's in the Air Operations Unit of ICRC since 2014 and currently Project Manager for Innovation in Humanitarian Aviation. And in charge of the implementation of drones for ICRC operations. He's today calling in from Kenya, from the field, so thank you so much for being a part of this today. From Médecins Sans Frontières, for Doctors Without Borders, we have Dr. Philippe de Saint-Georges. He's a medical doctor in neurobiology with a strong computer science background, has been at the MSF Air Operations Unit since 2010, leading flight operations, emergency deployments, and also coordinating mission flights in conflict areas such as Afghanistan, DRC, South Sudan, and Yemen. From the World Food Programme, we have Mr. Joe Gillespie, former international advisor for the Flight Safety Foundation. He's now a safety and regulatory advisor for WFP, Aviation Safety Unit, and since 2019 with the Unmanned Aircraft Systems team. Joe has enjoyed a very long career. He is a military and civil aviation pilot. He's worked with operators of the likes of Malaysia and Emirates Airlines, and as a captain and as an instructor. And he holds a UK drone pilot license and provides safety and regulatory inputs to the unmanned aircraft operations of the World Food Programme. Also from WFP, we have Mr. Patrick McKay, who has been with WFP since 2004 and as an unmanned aircraft systems focal point based in South Africa, and as an ICT officer, also now seconded to the emergency technology unmanned aircraft systems team in Rome at the headquarters. He's a drone licensed pilot and also a trainer since 2017. And has led the first official deployment of drones for the World Food Programme back in 2019 for the cyclones response of Idai and Kenneth in Mozambique. And lastly, but not least, from Unicef, we have Mr. Tautis Yuvskoskas. He has been a drone specialist in the industry for a long time and now a drone specialist at Unicef since 2018. He was previously based in Malawi, coordinating activities of unmanned aircraft in the humanitarian drone testing corridor that the Civil Aviation set up in 2016 there, and now with UNICEF Supply Division in Copenhagen, providing technical and implementation inputs across country offices around the world. And he's also coordinating a donor coordination, a coalition of donors called the Interagency Supply Chain Group, Unmanned Aircraft Systems body, which coordinates around topics in the public health supply chain field. So without more introductions, I give the screen and the floor to Mr. Alexis Clare.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you very much to the Flight Safety Foundation for this opportunity to be here today. So before discussing directly about drone, I just would like to give some inputs, to share some input about our innovation process, because we believe involve also some safety point. Next slide, please. So it's about forecasting innovation project because of operational, staff, and financial constraint. Unlike all innovation projects, drone projects are under a lot of pressure to quickly produce results. But here also, anticipation of the final result is a very difficult exercise. Just to give two examples outside the drone operation, we can take the solar panel. New York Times article predicted that solar panel will become a source of almost limitless energy of the sun. But this article was written in 1954, so a long time ago now. And in the other end, 20 years ago, very few had anticipated the speed and success of the implementation of mobile phone in Africa. So in our drone operation and in drone innovation process, we have to balance between these two extremes, a long time before implementation and in the other end, a very rapid implementation. So we have to adapt our resources to between these two extremes. So therefore, mainly due to our operational context, aviation regulation, aviation safety, and general risk assessment, we try to start from our internal needs and constraints only, and a very slow validation process before implementation. Next slide, please. Just to give a quick overview, it is a very basic curve about the hype cycle to display innovation process. On the left side, so you see technology visibility on implementation and the progression during the time. So obviously at the beginning, there is a lot of initiative and a lot of article in the news about drone, about the drone, and it's also the easy to do it syndrome. So there is a lot of initial initiative in our organization, and without any coordination. Then we start to work and to do some flight tests and to see all the problem that the individual can face. And at this stage, we start to slowly organize and structure the function of the work. And what we would like to focus here, it is the need to build an ecosystem between all the stakeholders inside the organization. Because obviously in the first part of the curve, with the individual initiative, sometimes there is a lot of incidents and some are related to safety. And then when you continue the curve, you arrive at the stabilization of the ecosystem and the continuous SOP, safety and quality improvement. We believe at the moment at ICRC we're at the green dot position. So that means we are improving and going into SOP implementation, but still we need to do the proof of concept inside our organization to avoid the red line and then to be unable to implement. And to do that, we are trying to focus on the 3 cycles that you have on the right screen. On the right part of the screen, sorry, and to try to maintain our project in the middle of the 3 cycles, the feasibility, which is about techniques, desirability, which is about the needs, internal needs, and the viability of the project, which is how we are going to fund and to pay for the service. Next slide, please. So at ICRC, we have 2 main use, obviously, which is cargo delivery and data collection. Just to start shortly for the cargo delivery, because at this stage, for us, it's only a technical watch. We believe that it would be possible to do some flight tests for the proof of concept within 1 year for medium cargo. It is the picture that you can see, the first one, and it's about 1 ton payload. And probably in 5 years, it would be possible to try to test for the heavy cargo, which is the second slide of UAV, and it's about 50 tons of cargo. But at this level, we're just at the technical watch. So next slide, please. It will be so on the data collection now, which is at the moment the main part of our flight test and operational test. We are using the true drone that you can see on the left of the screen. So rotorcopter and fixed wing drone, a light drone below 1 kilogram. Our flight test was focused on 4 kind of data, which is mapping an area and to a very precise detail on this area for general mapping. Then the NDVI on multispectral sensor, which is mainly focused on agriculture and crop monitoring. Then we have the digital terrain model, which is mainly focused on the assessment, for example, of water infrastructure. And then the last one in the thermal spectral, which is for detection of mapping of UXO, which is an unexploded ordnance, and mainly for mine on ground. So at this stage, obviously, we can point out some advantages of the use of drones about flexibility, because we can collect data when we want it, when we need it, and about high resolution that can provide the use of drone. Also to be able to collect data despite cloud cover, so we fly below the cloud cover. And another important thing about drone is the versatility and the multi-sensor capability. But also we are convinced that there is no silver bullet, and with the use of drone, we will need to have a combination of field data and satellite input, satellite imagery input. And still we have some concern, and we still have to work on the safety part, data security, and then obviously the evolution of the regulation is also an important point for us. Next slide, please. And finally, just to give some input about risk mapping, we've done this exercise just about light drone and in RC operational context, so that is valid for us, obviously. And it will need to be consolidated with a flight test. All this risk mapping is not necessarily related to safety in aviation, but some of them, and I'm sure we'll be able to discuss that together, and it will be very interesting. Mainly, you have on the right side of the map the in-flight collision, which is one of the main concerns for safety aviation in the use of drone. But also, we have many questions about the lack of appropriate training for the pilot on drone, on how we are going to overcome these difficulties. And on the left side of the map also, which is about collision with person on ground, how to make sure and to implement the appropriate SOP to avoid any kind of accident in these topics. So that's a very short presentation. So for the next slide, just to say thank you to you, and back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Alexis. I'll introduce and give the screen to Mr. Philippe de Saint-Georges.
Hello to everybody. First, I want to thank Fly Safety and all the panelists to be there and to offer the possibility to share experience on this platform. About MSF, I think that a lot of you know who we are. We are an NGO, a non-governmental organization, medically oriented in emergency. Just some figures to show what we are doing. Per year we are doing about 11 million of outpatient consultation, for example, about 400,000 birth assistance. We are, let's say, about 40,000 staff, and our budget is about 1 billion. So it's still quite a big organization, worldwide deployed. In MSF, we have an air cell who is dealing with all the flight on the field, and for that we have about 16 aircraft deployed in I think 16 countries. We share also 5 aircraft with ICRC, and we move, let's say, 20,000 parts and 1,000 tons of freight with this small aircraft. Next slide, please. So, where MSF is with the UAV project, I would say not very far. Since a couple of years, some mission or some HQ made spot project, but nothing has been really put in a standard project development. And just before COVID, the aircell got the request from operation to build a technical platform and to follow up the scenario deployment of drones on the project. But with the COVID, we are still waiting to start really. We begin to, of course, to take all the contact and with the other organization to share the network. We see, of course, a lot of potentiality in the use of drones. Like everybody, it's first for mapping or data acquisition, of course, for cargo, for search and recruit perhaps. Next slide, please. But still, we are dealing also with the SWOT, asking which could be really the advantage and the disadvantage to deploy drone. In the immediate perspective, we see, I would say, more disadvantage to let drone be deployed like that on the field without supervision. It's all the problem of authorization, certification of the pilot and things like that. And is the reason why we will start first by writing SOP, by putting them in application and pushing for first to be safe operating drones. That will be for sure one of the main occupation of the air cell for the two coming years. That's all I have to say. I would say I will pass the micro to the other one. We'll probably we have probably a better experience on MSF on this topic. That's all for me. Thanks for your assistance.
Thank you so much, Philippe. I'll pass the screen now to Mr. Joe Gillespie.
Okay, you should have my screen now. That's me. I would like to start by disagreeing with Alexis that 1954 was a long time ago. It seems quite recent to me. So I'm from the WFP ASU UAS safety team, and that's enough 3-letter abbreviations for just about anyone. The one perhaps you might want some help with is ASU. That's the Aviation Safety Unit. We were formed in a meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh in 2019. I hasten to add we didn't go to Egypt especially. We now have members spread across the entire ASU network. And these are our principal work areas. So we're looking for safety standards that are practical, that we can use to evaluate operators and build capacity throughout the network. but safely. Part of this work's being assisted by some funding from the UK, the UAS Technical Working Group project. This is where we see the principal uses: imaging, connectivity, and cargo. Cargo is an interesting one. One of the speakers was just talking about that. So we're going to break this down into freight, food, and equipment, clearly a big thing for WFP. Medical samples, obviously inbound from the field, and supplies outbound to the field. And then possibly, although not definitely, spraying, so pesticide for locusts and the like, and possibly crop treatments. The only one that we've really got going at the moment is imaging. I'm not going to talk about that at length because I believe Patrick will fill you in on that. I'll just come back to operator standards that I talked about there. This is our story so far on that. This is a really important area for us. What are the options for us? Well, we could use local state regulations, but many of you will be familiar with the fact that local state regulations either don't exist or are incomplete in many areas. We could use foreign state regulations. So, for example, we could insist on people meeting FAA regulations, but that might not go down too well either. There are some ICAO SARPs available, but they only address international IFR operations, and we're of the view that most of our ops, initially at least, will be domestic. ICAO have also drafted some model UAS regulations to help states draft their own regulatory suite. But WFP is not actually a regulator. We're looking for standards, not regulations. We may be able to use this in the background. Since we're talking through a Flight Safety Foundation avenue right now, I have to mention the Flight Safety Foundation Basic Aviation Risk Standard, which has now been developed for RPAS as well. This has just been published, or just about to be published in its 3rd edition, and this is looking promising for us. We're working with Flight Safety Foundation. In fact, I have a call this afternoon to discuss our memorandum of understanding with the Flight Safety Foundation. So we're optimistic about that one. There's also the Joint Authorities recommendations for unmanned systems, JARIS. Again, a fairly comprehensive package, but these are just recommendations. We might be able to draw something from them. And finally, ISO 21384 Part 3, which is operational procedures for UAS. And I have to be frank, we haven't seen them yet. We're waiting for a copy of that ISO. So these are the areas I'm going to be exploring, or have been exploring rather, to come up with a set of standards for WFP UAS operations. With that, I will hand back to Sarah.
Excellent, very interesting, Joe. I hand over to Patrick McKay.
Thank you very much. I'm going to skip the first slide. I think Sarah did a very good introduction, so we can go straight to the next slide, please. Okay. WFP has been working with national disaster management agencies on the use of drones in emergencies since 2017. Then last year, when Cyclone Idai struck, the Mozambique government asked us to coordinate the drone response. Our primary focus was, of course, on mapping, and we mapped the entire city of Beira down to a 3-centimeter resolution. We also mapped every affected village outside of Beira. There were a lot of other use cases, though, where we found drones to be very useful. We did search and rescue from vehicles, so we could see beyond flooded roads, and from boats to be able to give them an eye in the sky. We also used the drones to check line of sight before putting up antenna. This improved our antenna locations significantly, and it was also much safer than putting a person on a damaged roof. In total, we had 16 drones. We did 154 flights, collecting 1.3 terabytes of data, 60,000 images, and we served over 20 different organizations. Next slide, please. WFP's got a tool we call DEEP, a digital engine for emergency photo analysis. DEEP is our machine learning tool for emergencies. We use this in Mozambique to first detect buildings and then to classify them into buildings with roofs and without, and also to calculate the areas of roofs missing. So we knew how much tarp was needed to give people shelter. The key feature that differentiates DEEP from other machine learning tools is that DEEP isn't cloud-based. It runs on a standard gaming laptop. In emergencies, we don't have access to the cloud, so we need something that is mobile and portable. Next slide, please. We're very fortunate at WFP to have an aviation division as well as an aviation safety division. The aviation division will be leading the cargo drone rollout, everything from very light cargo, which is medical supplies, up to multiple tons of food. For the rest of us, we don't often have helicopters to do assessments, and when we do, we know they cost $2,000 an hour to keep airborne. We're hoping to replace these with long-range VTOL drones to do assessments in distant areas, and also to take over the search role in search and rescue operations, leaving the helicopters to do the rescues. Another area of focus for us is connectivity. WFP is planning to deploy tethered drones to restore connectivity in the future. These drones will fly 24 hours a day, providing internet access and be able to cover areas of over 12 square kilometers. With 3 of these drones, for instance, we could have covered the entire city of Beira with internet. You can think of it as a cell phone tower that fits into a few suitcases. Next slide, please. There are, of course, obstacles. Most drone service providers exist in the blue countries you see on the map, while WFP operates in pretty much all the countries apart from those blue countries. We do like to see localized solutions for the deployment of drones, and we're working with our Aviation and Aviation Safety Division to identify and vet local providers. Another issue for us is regulations, which don't seem to be keeping up with technology, such as BVLOS regulations being well behind drone capabilities. We also have a challenge in emergency response with the transport of batteries by air. Regulations currently treat all types of lithium as equal. While we know LiPo can explode quite spectacularly, lithium iron phosphate is one of the safest chemistries around. With aviation safety, we always talk about acceptable risk, and I imagine there should be a chemistry along with a packing enclosure that should meet these risk levels. That's all from me. I'll hand back over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I introduce Tautis Yuvskoskas.
Thank you, Sarah. I just firstly would like to use an opportunity to thank the Flight Safety Foundation for organizing this panel as a part of their annual International Air Safety Summit. And I think today, more than ever before, it's very important to bring the manned aviation and unmanned aviation communities closer in sharing experiences, best practices, and in harmonizing regulations that concern safety. So I think Foundation is perfectly suited and located to be that platform. So thanks for organizing this panel. My name is Tautis, and I work at Unicef Supply and Logistics Headquarters in Copenhagen. As probably many of you know, UNICEF works to improve the lives of children and their families. In order to effectively do that, we are in over 190 countries and territories across the world. So we are really a field-based organization. The UNICEF Supply Division in Copenhagen fulfills the supply procurement and logistics function for the organization globally, providing essential commodities, including life-saving commodities to improve the health, education, safety, and well-being of children. And in addition to my UNICEF's role, I'm also coordinating, as Sarah already provided, a group of 11 donor and international organizations to focus on the drones and supply chain and coordinate and align investments, as well as share experience, knowledge, and learnings. May you switch to the next slide, please? Obviously, some of the areas where we operate as UNICEF are hardest areas to reach, and we are looking into ways on how we can increase access to health services and commodities, especially for the underserved communities and children. And therefore, drones are a part of that technology portfolio we are looking into. And in doing so, we work closely with the governments, donors, and industry partners to share with them the technical support and resources and clarify what are the best use cases and applications. As you can see, there is really big potential for drones in the supply chain. Some of it is objective data about the accessibility and infrastructure. Some of it's related to the existing knowledge about the drone technology. Next slide, please. So UNICEF has been actively involved in humanitarian drone activities since 2016 with the establishment of the first ever humanitarian drone corridor in Africa. In the beginning of 2020, my colleagues in Malawi launched the African Drone and Data Academy that provides drone education to students from across the continent. And the first cohort, by the way, already graduated and is successfully integrated into the job market, serving as professional pilots. We have also been involved in multiple drone delivery projects that focused on delivering health commodities such as vaccines, diagnostic samples, essential medicines to and from hard-to-reach areas. Now, building on this experience and work with our local partners, we have identified a number of different challenges that need to be addressed in order to seek for sustainable and scalable drones integration into supply chain operations. As you can see from the slide, there is 5 key challenges that we see are very relevant for the drone delivery. And by our work at the supply division, we are trying to solve, overcome, and mitigate most of them. Next slide, please. Globally, we have seen 28 plus different drone delivery activities, including small and large cargo, out of which only 2 projects managed to go beyond 12 months and qualified for sustained drone operations. And that tells us that the rest of the projects mainly lasted 4 to 6 months on average, focusing mainly on technical feasibility, a proof of concept, and pilot stage project. However, there is a lack of evidence because of the short duration of those projects. There is a lack of evidence on the impact and cost effectiveness of using drones into supply chain. And therefore, our theory of change that we try to follow currently is to invest into evidence-based drone integration into supply chain that is backed by the data and evidence showing particular supply chain and logistics problems that drones are able to solve in particular contexts and countries. Next slide, please. Now that we have somewhat mature drone technology that has been proven to be capable of carrying payloads of, let's say, up to 10 kilograms, sometimes larger payloads over distances of 100 to 150 kilometers, sometimes even more if a drone is fuel driven, we must think strategically on how drones complement existing modes of transport and what competitive advantage do drones bring to the table. We don't consider drones as a silver bullet, rather an additional mode of transport, and therefore it's important to determine the use case and context rigorously to be able to purposefully integrate this technology in an impactful and cost-effective fashion. Therefore, we are currently developing tools and resources for our country offices and their governmental counterparts to assist them to integrate drone technology into supply chain operations where appropriate and where specific need and demand exist. Our focus for drone integration is to find areas where the use of drones can bring the transformational value in terms of impact, benefits, and cost savings. And in order to influence the trajectory of a lot of pilot projects as opposed to a lot of sustained operations, we want to focus on the 3-pillar approach, which not only tackles regulatory issues. We acknowledge that this is a very important area, but we also consider use case primarily and solution at the core. You can see a decision tree that we have developed internally at Unicef to assess the drone applicability in a particular context, and that raises a very important question, which we hope to change the narrative of. We are not approaching the problem from the perspective, let's use drones, but rather raising a question, shall we use drones for delivery? And in order to answer this question, we need to really know the context of the problem, the enabling environment, as well as choose a solution appropriately subject to the problem. So this tool serves as a guidance for our country offices that wish to integrate drones into supply chain. And of course, this decision tool kind of has a detailed checklist on what implementers need to consider while integrating drones into supply chain. Next slide, please. So as the decision tree serves as a main guidance for drone delivery, integration, and implementation, here you can see some of the resources and tools that we have been developing as a part of that process. The set of tools and resources that tries to address and overcome the challenges that I shared before. And through creation of these resources, we believe that we can provide support to implementers, particularly our governmental partners, in 3 areas: analyzing where the drones, analyzing the context and the problem where the drones get integrated and where they can bring the best value, developing and building enabling ecosystem, and choosing an appropriate drone solution, especially with the focus on procurement contracting. In this way, we can ensure that previous experience from the multiple drone pilot projects and sustained operations gets embedded into the future projects, and drone integration into supply chain becomes more streamlined, sustainable, and scalable. So thank you very much, and I turn back to Sarah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we have some good timing now to continue the discussion. So I invite all of the panelists to come to show themselves and join the discussion. Excellent. So there's been a number of very interesting topics covered. I'd like to also invite Debbie Kirkman to join in case the Flight Safety Foundation would like to also ask a few questions before I kick in.
No, do go ahead, Sarah, but I'm happy to join this group here.
Brilliant. So I'll first start with what Alexis presented earlier on the maturity curve of where you see your organization right now in this learning process, and basically at the stage of R&D and the deployment of the systems. Where do you see the industry at this stage based on the experience you've gained? Let's say specifically on the imagery side. Have you made some assessment of the technology itself and the operators out there?
No, I wouldn't say I would be able to give an overview of the whole industry. For the moment, we are really focus on the needs that we have and how we can use a drone to fill some gap, on to increase efficiency, or to make it faster in some way. But we did not investigate about how the whole industry can provide us this service for the moment. We're at the very beginning for that.
Excellent. So do you see yourselves, and this question applies to everyone actually, all the organizations, do you see yourselves more comfortable potentially owning such systems and training your own staff, or would the model of outsourcing services to operators be something more comfortable for? I see that Joe raises his hand.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question. The problem that we have is that if we want to operate our own drones, we have to be drone operators, which means that we need a drone operating certificate of some kind. Most of those are national, not international. In fact, really, they're all national, not international. So where do we get that drone operator certificate? We're working on this problem. We may find that many nations would accept, for example, an EASA or FAA certificate. We don't know. It's very hard to say. But our plan is to move forward having some internal operations and some contracted operations, divided mainly along the lines of the activity of the operation.
Absolutely. Tautis, you also had some comment on this.
Yeah, just to build on what Joe said, I think from Unicef's perspective, we, at the moment, the way we contract our transport service providers, we usually do contract through 3PL providers. And interesting trend that I see, especially in the supply chain and logistics, is that there is a consolidation happening where big 3PL providers, likes of UPS, Astral Aviation in Africa, they are trying to make partnerships with smaller drone service providers, drone manufacturers, and then trying to integrate this transport modality into their existing service offerings. I think this is a very positive development, because those three PL providers, they have good knowledge, especially if they are in air transportation. They have very good knowledge and certifications for unmanned aviation, and they have good understanding about safety. And I think going forward, quite a lot of organizations will rely on those three PLs. So private sector engagement, I think it's very, very important for us, and we try to work with them very closely on that.
Yes, that's indeed a development that has been happening in the last few years. How about on the data side, and in terms of handling big terabytes of data? Patrick, you mentioned that you had some significant collection for an emergency response scenario. How do you handle that in an emergency context where you have little to no communications and low internet bandwidth setting? And also ICRC, you may also jump in. Sorry.
Thanks. This was literally the situation we found ourselves in IDI. We had a city with no internet at all to begin with, and then very, very little going forward. We were very fortunate that we prepared in advance. We had donated equipment to the National Disaster Management Agency, which included a number of very high-spec gaming laptops. So that's most of our data was actually happening locally on those laptops. We would collect data all day and would process data all night, and we'd get that to the other UN agencies to go and share that. We are talking about big data, but we're not talking about massive data. So when you're talking about 1 or 2 terabytes, you can handle that locally. It's only when you're going into the 10s or 20s of terabytes where the ability to have the cloud is really necessary.
And how have you been handling that so far? Is it the organization that collects and owns the data, or is it the service supplier if there's a third party providing a service that provides the analytics?
We've worked with a mix of both, actually. So in Mozambique, we've obviously built up the skills in the National Disaster Management Agency. They're able to handle the data, they're able to catalog it. We use a lot of open source tools as well, things like Open Drone Map to process and store the data. But then we've also got partnerships with other groups. Amazon's web services, they've given us a couple of snowballs to start using for our data projects there. So it's a mix. So we look for the best case for each particular situation.
Excellent. Alexis, do you want to add something on this from your perspective?
About how we process the data?
Yeah, how do you handle?
Yeah, for the moment, we are trying to process the data locally. So we bring the computer that is capable to process the data, and we are trying to see if there is some context we cannot have this full setup, how we can effectively upload the data in our headquarters in Geneva to be able to process this data at this level. But we are still in the process to test what would be the most efficient way for us.
Absolutely. How do you see basically the challenge of having the right assets and trained operators or pilots available in a given scenario geographically, and also how has that been impacting your ability to actually deploy on time?
For the moment, we are just doing some tests, so it's not necessarily about deployment, but effectively, you're right, it is one of the big concerns about how we are going to train the pilot if we are in the scenario of to have the inside skill and to the inside operation. And because in one of the scenario we will not have any dedicated pilot, but some of these different métiers will have a dedicated person. For example, an agronomist, we will have the skill to fly the drone. But in aviation, we are used to have someone who is dedicated directly to aviation, so he's doing this every day. So about training and recency training, all the processes are well implemented. So we have to, on these topics also, to see how we can managed to invent a new standard, saying if someone is flying the drone every 3 months or every 6 months, how are we going to make sure he maintains his level of knowledge, the skill level on everything? So we have some project about e-learning for the refreshment of knowledge. It is a small step, but we are still thinking about this important problem.
Absolutely. I know Joe has also some inputs to this, and this goes back to the challenge of having a harmonized training and licensing model. How do you see this from your end, WFP?
Well, I think an important thing, I think I mentioned in one of my slides about capacity building. And the key for us is not to have a few partners, contracting partners around the world. It's to have local resources on the ground. So we want to promote commercial drone operations in these countries that are viable and making money that we can call upon should there be an emergency. And so that's going to be part of our work, is to build that capacity.
Excellent. And I'd like to ask also Philippe, what are your thoughts, since you're now at the stage of evaluating what others have been learning and doing in this space? What is your prime concern?
Well, for this licensing problem, that's a big question for us, because, of course, in all our mission, we see a lot of people popping up saying, I have the drone license, I have a drone certification, but very difficult for us to evaluate exactly what does mean. Of course, now you have the FIA license. Slowly, you will have the EASA license that will also probably be a standard, but it's very difficult for us to certify that the people on the mission are really safe to fly drone. But we already know that it will be difficult for us to avoid for small drone people to flying them. We are sure that it will happen, even if we put constraints. We are quite sure that we will face small drones and pilots saying, I can fly and I will fly for the benefit of the organization. It's something we are discussing internally to try to put that on track and to have a supervision of that. The other problem is for bigger drone. For bigger drone, the current idea in MSF is for sure to work with third-party operator. If you are going for a drone above 200 kg, for example, of cargo, we are quite sure that we will not operate them by ourselves. We will take contact with operator, as we are doing for the other plane. We are leasing plane for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and the operator keep the responsibility of operating them on the field where we are operating. For the moment, it's our idea.
Yeah, so absolutely that ties into what Tautis was mentioning, the trend for cargo operations to be absorbed within current 3PL logistics companies.
Yes.
Yeah, so on that front, in the logistics side, Tautis, you had a very interesting decision-making tree. You were coordinating several working groups and have had quite some experience now. Unicef has built quite some experience on lessons learned and how to share this knowledge. You mentioned that the prime challenge or the prime area that you're focusing on is to provide a thorough needs assessments to governments and stakeholders. Is that something that you are focusing on now prior to any deployment in different country settings, or how is this implemented? And on the sideline to this effort, have you seen a change in the donors of how they actually have been supporting to roll out such efforts in country?
Yeah, these are two great questions. I think just answering the first one about the problem definition, that's the thing that we strive for. Being on the HQ level, obviously, we serve more like a consultation, guidance purpose, but our country offices are really independent in deciding what is best to them. From the supply division's perspective, we are there to serve with methodological tools, with systematic tools on how to evaluate one or another technology in the hands of the logisticians at the country level. But obviously, demands and needs assessment is something that we really try to invest most, because that's gonna help us, as well as it's gonna help the market to really evaluate the size, the scope, the scale of drone delivery activities. We don't think that it will fit in every single country, but there are definitely contexts and countries where drone technology would really bring big value. Now, to connect to the second question about donor coordination, so that's pretty much the essence of the Interagency Supply Chain Group's UAS coordinating body, which meets every month, and those 11 donors, they bring plethora of different experiences, learnings from their field projects and pilot projects, and I think that's something that we want to build on and not to repeat the same mistakes. So one of the approaches that we've been trying to adopt as a part of ISG UAS, as opposed to making a top-down approach on implementing drone delivery projects where a donor would think that, maybe drones make sense. As opposed to this, we try to engage multiple local donors on the country level, where we say government implementing partners at the country level could perhaps work on the proposal that builds on the needs assessment, but also considers the enabling environment, if it is possible to implement. And then they bring that proposal to us to really consider and discuss. And that's something that we really want to apply going forward, because the buy-in from the government and local partners, local stakeholders is essential. I think we are past that stage where we had multiple different donor-driven, donor-led projects. I think that here is the time for the really government, especially ministries of health, civil aviation authorities, to really provide their inputs and tell what they actually need, so that donors would just be able to help them.
Absolutely, that's a very good effort and progress in that side of the work. And you mentioned also the need of having local buy-in. I believe, is that something others have also been experiencing in terms of having the local communities understand what is the purpose of introducing these technologies and the value it brings to their livelihoods?
Well, I'll come in there if I may. I think the answer is it's such early days that everywhere is different. Patrick might be able to talk about how the Mozambican authorities responded to a real operation there. And I was lucky enough to hear them speaking at a meeting in Rome last year. So Patrick, what was your experience with Mozambique?
So we've found a lot of interest from the governments in terms of rolling out the new technologies. I think they see it as a way to firstly keep costs low, but also to potentially save lives in future. So we've done trainings for a number of different countries around the world, and in some of the cases we've actually had one of the governments, for instance Mozambique, invited their counterparts from the disaster management agency Eswatini to join in the trainings. So it does look like there is a need for this type of technology, and it is spreading through the various networks in governments. So we found very good response with most of the governments, which is actually one of our targets, is to train up national disaster management agencies. So they are one of the parties we do focus on.
Tautis.
I just want to compliment my colleagues at WFP who have done tremendous work in Mozambique. I was in Malawi when IDA happened, and I saw their efforts there, and I think that's a really good approach. Something that we've been doing also as a part of UNICEF to build the government capacity, and I think that's the way to go if we think about the sustainable and scalable use of drones. And I was lucky to participate in a panel at the African Drone Forum where representatives of the disaster response in Mozambique presented on this, and their program is really an example for the others to follow in this field in humanitarian response, especially in imagery.
Excellent. Yeah, it's very inspiring work that all of you are doing. We are reaching the end of the time. I could spend hours discussing with each of you. It's a commensurate level of experience that has come from your field operations, from the aviation side, and also from this new technology implementation. I'd like to ask you if any of you have any questions between yourselves that you'd like to ask each other.
I think we all meet on a fairly regular basis anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now it's all virtual, but it's great to have had the time with all of you here. And lastly, to the Flight Safety Foundation, to Debbie, I'll give you the floor.
Fantastic. And I want to thank Dr. De La Rosa and all of our panelists for sharing their insights and perspectives today. We've really heard a lot of key themes about our approaches and innovations in UAS, balancing local needs, supporting local environments with the need for standards across country borders so that we can have a consistent way to apply and efficiently apply these UAS procedures, standard operating procedures. It was clear that safety, as well as whether it's something sustainable and economically appropriate, is something that every one of these organizations is looking at. And you can see from all the varied uses that our panelists described, we're looking at humanitarian uses of drones for imaging, for connectivity, communications, as well as for cargo. At Flight Safety Foundation, we're hoping to help move forward, especially in the area of safety and regulations, to encourage these organizations, not only the ones featured, but other NGOs, to take the greatest advantage of the promise of UAS in the future. And we really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you very much.